Hey, friggin' heathens, welcome back to the podcast. We are Astrid, she, her.
And Mox, they, them.
And in this episode, we're going to talk about ancestor veneration. This is a slightly different episode than our previous ones. The first part will be Mox and I defining some terms, talking about some historical precedents for ancestor veneration in heathenry, and giving examples of ancestor veneration in historical sources and research. And the second part of the episode will be a conversation with our friend Wolf the Red, who is a YouTuber and the guy who runs the community-oriented aspects of the Hold's Discord server. We're going to let him introduce himself later in the interview portion of the episode, but links to his channel and to the Hold are going to be in the description, so make sure you check him out. So to jump right in with all of our fun sources and stuff. So what is ancestor veneration? Ancestor veneration is the honoring of dead ancestors, shockingly enough, be it biological ancestors, chosen ancestors, or community ancestors, as part of your practice. Known and unknown ancestors are often included in this, but like all things heathen, this varies from individual to individual. Technically, by strict definition, ancestor worship and ancestor veneration are the same thing, but many polytheists, including me, tend to reserve the word worship for deities and non-human entities and the word veneration for ancestors. Similar to Catholics and saints, worship is used for God alone and you venerate saints. So it's kind of what I use to compare the two words.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overlap, obviously, between worship and veneration, but they're generally two distinct practices within a religious practice. But it's, being pedantic because that's what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little variation between the definition of the word, but in use, they have significantly different connotations.
Yes. We see ancestor veneration in nearly all polytheist religions globally, including those that are pre-Christian and post-Christian in some form or another. So as far as what we have in historical sources about ancestor veneration, there's a lot and also not very much. It kind of takes some digging and some extrapolation from sources to find these things, depending on what you're looking at. And according to DuBois, who wrote this great book, it's a little dated because it was written quite a while ago, but it's really good. It's Nordic Religions in the Viking Age. It was written in 1999, so it can be a little bit dated, some of the language.
Yeah.
But it's still a great book. And according to him, ancestor veneration happened in all Nordic groups to varying degrees and often happened near or at the grave of an ancestor. Ancestor graves were usually close to a homestead for lots of reasons, but it was obviously an important part of daily life. He says, memorial feasts and other rituals ensured the contentedness of the deceased and secured the person's aid for the living community. The dead were seen as essential guardians, watching that the family's members upheld the rights and responsibilities incumbent upon the clan. So they were very important.
We can get in there a little bit about the DCer and the Hemina, which is a whole thing unto itself, and we could probably do an episode on that. But the DCer were seen as protective spirits of female ancestors generally.
Yes.
And
No, go ahead. Sorry.
And the Hemina is basically the luck from your ancestors, but it's also viewed as a feminine spirit.
Yeah, it's like it's a kind of a part of your soul, but also a part of your family line. It's very weird and complicated.
It is.
Ocean Keltoy has a great video about it, so watch that. We might end up doing an episode about something similar to that later on, but there's so much involved with like ancestor veneration and how the dead interact with living people in their communities. It's fucking cool. But yeah, lots of sagas have stories taking place at grave mounds and barrows. Mox found a bunch of really cool stuff about this.
Yes. One example, the Flatey book has Halfdan the Black and Olaf Gerdstafalfer, I think.
Close enough.
When they died, offerings were made to their grave mounds. In the Ynglinga saga, Freyr was buried in a grave mound secretly, and people continued to pour gold and silver and copper into the mound. There's a more detailed account in the Olaf saga von Tryggvasonar. It says he was paid taxes of gold, silver, and copper for 3 years, after which people believed he must be dead, but they continued to sacrifice to him as their god. After 3 years, probably not coming out of that mound.
He's still paying taxes. Damn it.
Exactly. The cult of the mound as connected to Freyr is consistently placed within Sweden in all the sources that we have.
Yes.
The saga Olaf's and Helga actually says when heathens made a great sacrifice for the seasons or for prosperity, they would all go to a mound and sacrifice. It's lovely when they include information about that. Like, this is a regular practice. People did this consistently.
Mm-hmm. It was a communal thing. Like, it wasn't just one person or one family going out and doing it. It was like the whole community went out and did these things.
Yeah.
It was very cool.
It was very cool, yeah. And there are many stories in the sagas of the dead being offered to and even impacting the world of the living after death. Hervarar saga states that King Guthrumr was worshipped by men after his death and called their god, which can be seen as kind of a hero cult type thing, but that's also, like we had talked about, ancestors of community or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The sagas and Lenamabok contain the tradition that the dead pass into the mountains, which I thought was interesting. The dead are not limited to the grave. Like, you don't have to go to a mound.
Yes.
Necessarily. But, it was the common practice, but they do believe that the dead are elsewhere other than the grave as well.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to touch on that in a bit, too. It's a cool thing.
We are. Yes. Saxo, interestingly enough, Saxo wrote that when the wife of a man called Halfdanus bore him no children, he sought the counsel of the oracle at Uppsala, who told him he, quote, must make atonement to the shades of his brothers if he would raise up children, which shows that the dead were able to influence the living world, or believed to be able to.
Huh. Could you imagine being like, my wife can't have kids, and then some person in a temple going, you have to apologize to your dead brothers?
Exactly.
Could you?
It apparently worked. They had children afterwards.
Oh my gosh.
And one of his children went on to do great deeds. So it was worth it, I guess.
Oh, man.
There are many stories of people sitting on mounds in the sagas. There were kings dispensing orders and judgments from their ancestors' mounds, and there's one on which there was a mound that someone regularly sat on on which no snow would fall. So there's this kind of otherworldliness to the mounds, and also kind of a sense of authority, like for the king speaking judgments and orders from their ancestors' mound. It was kind of, this is to kind of gain the aids of their ancestors in dispensing judgment kind of thing. It gives those vibes. That's just my interpretation there.
Yeah, definitely.
The story I found most interesting is also in the Flateyjar book. There was a shepherd named Hallbjorn who used to sit on the mound of a poet named Thorleif, and he would sometimes sleep there. But he wanted to honor the poet with a poem in praise of him. He was just, he really dug this poet. The problem is that Hallbjorn was a really bad poet.
Oh no.
He could not write a poem. So one night, after trying unsuccessfully to write the poem, he fell asleep, and he dreamed that the mound opened up and the figure of an enormous man came out and climbed up beside him. He thanked the shepherd for his efforts. Good try.
Oh no.
And told him he would give him a poem, and if the poet could remember and recite it when he woke up, he would become a great poet. And the shepherd did remember it, was able to recite it, and after that he became a really great poet with renown all throughout the area. So that shows a belief that the dead, not just ancestors by blood, could actually give advice and offer aid after death.
Oh, that's so cool. That's awesome. That's such a good story.
Yeah, it's really cool. I highly recommend reading The Road to Hell, especially chapter 4 is where a lot of these references are taken from. I can't remember the name of the chapter. It may be called Cult of the Dead, I think. There's even more examples in there. There are just so many sagas where these sorts of things are mentioned.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the book is fantastic on its own, so you should read it anyway.
Yes,
but like
it's a wonderful book.
But that chapter specifically is really good when dealing with ancestor veneration and like afterlife stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and there was this sort of strange contradiction between having the underworld and afterlife as like this distant place and also being very close by, especially when dealing with ancestors. DuBois, again, calls this a localized underworld tradition. In the saga of Hervor and Heidrek, there is a story about the dead being conscious inhabitants of their graves. Hervor visits the grave of her father and brothers to get a sword that they were buried with in order to avenge their deaths. She threatens them with an uneasy death if they don't help her and give her the sword.
Okay.
She curses them, and she says, "May you writhe within your ribs, your barrow and anthill where you rot. If you deny me Dvalin's sword, ghosts should not wield costly weapons."
Wow.
I don't know how I feel about cursing the dead, but, like, it worked, and she got the sword. So, I mean, it's some weird conclusions you can get to regarding that whole situation. The dead are both far away and very close in Norse stories. And it's really cool to think about when you look at things from that perspective. Like in the second lay of Helgi Hundingsbane, which is an Eddic poem in the Poetic Edda. It's a fantastic. There's 2 of them. They're both really good. Everyone should read them. They're amazing. But Helgi, the hero, dies and reaches Valhalla. But he's called back to his barrow where he was buried by Sigrun, his grieving widow. She is also a Valkyrie, by the way.
Nice.
But it shows that the dead might not stay in one place. They can move between places. So usually wherever they end up in the afterlife and their burial place are the places they move between. But it's possible they move other places as well. We just don't know.
Like the story of them residing in the mountains after death.
Yes, like it's really neat. I like the idea of like this localized afterlife situation. I like that idea. I think it's a really neat idea, and it makes a lot of sense, especially when, you know, people would build these settlements and they would stay there for generations because it was hard to move around.
Yeah.
So it made sense that they were like, well, they're in Valhalla or they're in Helheim or they're in Folkvanger or wherever the heck they are, but they're also like in the backyard. So we can go talk to them there. Cool. I love that. I love that idea.
It's also good to remember all these different kinds of traditions. There were likely different traditions in different places. Just like, you know, in one place they were believed to go in the mountains, and another there, you know, between the mounds and Valhalla. You know, there's not one unified Norse belief of anything. The people were too scattered.
And isolated.
And too isolated. Yeah, that they each kind of had their own practice that worked for them.
Mm-hmm.
Honoring and remembering ancestors after death is also part of ancestor veneration. Not just being able to interact with them directly, but just keeping their memory alive.
Yes.
There's a symbol in Heimskringla, Olaf Saga Tryggvasonar, chapter 35. King Svein held a symbol to commemorate his father Harald, and the king sent word to the Vikings that Jarl Sigvaldi and Bui and their brothers should come there and commemorate their fathers, who had recently passed as well, at symbol that the king was holding. And said, and after that, Jarl Sigvaldi drank his father's toast. So in Fagerskinna, the main ritual at the memorial symbol is called Bragaful, Toast of a Great Man. The custom is also described in Yngling Saga, chapter 36. They're called Bragarful. Toasting and remembering ancestors there and, you know, praising them is just a good part of veneration as well, just remembering them. In Yngling Saga, chapter 22, it mentions a funeral symbol. King Agne had at the time a gold ornament which had belonged to Visber. He now married Skalv, and she begged him to make a burial symbol in honor of her father. So there again, to praise the ancestors after death. Yngling Saga chapter 40 mentions an airship symbol. Now when Ingjald took the dominions in the kingdom of his father, King Ingjald ordered a great feast to be prepared in Uppsal and intended at that symbol to enter on his heritage after King Onund, his father. So they had a symbol to remember his ancestors, which also helped to solidify his kingship, because he's doing that based on the fact that he's the heir to the throne.
Yes.
So there were a lot of different motivations there, you know, but always remembering the ancestors was a big part of the culture.
Yes. There were probably, most likely, instances where someone would be like, oh, so-and-so is coming to visit from this faraway land, and he is a king of his place, and I'm a king of my place. So I'm going to brag about my ancestors, even though I have never met them. And they may not even actually be related to me, but my family says that they're related to me, so I'm going to brag about it. And then that way I look good in front of this visiting king. So there's like a weird mix and a weird balance of like actual religious sort of motivated symbol and ancestor veneration going on. And then there's also like this really public, manipulative politically motivated bragging about how cool your ancestors are in front of a visitor kind of happening.
Yeah.
I mean, you run into that a lot in heathen circles, like so-and-so says, I'm related to Ragnar Lothbrok. And it's like, oh, okay, I don't care.
Exactly.
Like, hooray, good for you. I mean, I'm related to Harold Fairhair twice by marriage, but it wasn't until the 1960s. So it's like, okay, whatever. Like, it mattered more then than it does now. But, like, it's still weird. I like it. It's fun.
Yeah.
So one of the other big things that we have as far as proof and evidence of ancestor veneration in Old Norse society is obviously archaeological evidence. And it shows that widespread practice of making food and leaving it at offerings of burial mounds happened. The saga of Hakon the Good has examples of this too. The pagans who insisted that King Hakon participate in their feast demanded that he drink toasts to the gods, as well as to the memory of departed kinsfolk. And that's in the Heimskringla. But the Oseberg ship burial, which was buried somewhere between roughly 800 and 834 CE, we don't really know. There's parts that are probably older, but we don't really know for sure, like a solid date. But that's a really stellar example of ancestor veneration happening.
Yeah.
It is absolutely famous. Everybody recognizes the Oseberg ship. When you see a picture of it, you will know exactly what it is. One half of the ship was buried, and the other half was left open to the air for weeks or possibly even months after the burial happened. And this allowed for a literal open-air grave. So evidence shows that the burial chamber itself was hastily covered after a few weeks, probably due to the very obvious decomposition smell coming from inside the burial chamber.
I would imagine.
So, like, people would go and visit the dead people, the dead women who were in this ship. And it had to have been absolutely incredible to see this ship coming out of a hillside.
Yeah.
And then people walking around on top of it. It's unbelievable. It's so cool. It's likely that people visited the dead in that ship. Those two female skeletons that were found in the burial. Neil Price in Children of Ash and Elm writes that it's likely that the boat graves at Valsgard were treated similarly, left open at one end as it emerged from the cemetery hill.
That's really cool.
I know, right? Like, it's such a cool image. This whole idea of people getting buried on a boat and then it literally sailing into the ground.
It reminds me a bit of how a lot of prominent political figures and all that will have their remains in state for a period of time to allow people to come pay their respects before they're finally buried.
Yeah, it probably is similar to that. Like, if it was, especially if it was somebody who was a big deal in the community.
If they're important enough to get their own ship. I mean,
yeah.
Ships aren't cheap.
No, they're not cheap. A whole big-ass ship. And the Oseberg ship is gorgeous. Like, it is carved.
It is so beautiful.
To the nines with animals and nature and just figures. Like, they spared no expense on this ship. And then they just buried it in the fucking ground. So it's like, obviously these women were important, or at least one of them was important. We don't know. We know next to nothing about them.
As is the way.
As is the way of things that we want to know more about. It's always the things we want to know more about we don't know anything about. But even like the less grandiose grave sites in Scandinavia have evidence of grave goods being moved after burial. So there's evidence of people going and visiting these sites after the funeral was over.
Yeah.
It's possible that these were families adding to graves after whatever ritual happened when the person was interred, or perhaps removing stuff after the formal funeral rites happened, especially since it's unlikely that grave robbing happened on a large scale, simply because the graves were often close to homes. And it would be really obvious and a problem if, like, you went and stole your neighbor's dad's sword and were walking around town with it.
Yeah.
Someone would say something to you.
Yeah, that would be difficult to miss.
Yeah, someone would say something.
Just imagine digging up a grave mound in someone's backyard. You know, they just open the door and there you are, digging in their ancestors' graves.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bjorn. I really wanted this sword. He said I could have it? No. Like, it's just, you just can't. Like,
no.
It's possible that it happened, but it's unlikely that it happened. But there are sites where it's been thought that maybe there was some sort of, like, state-sanctioned grave robbing happening, or that they were the result of feuds. Again, this comes from Neil Price's book, The Desecration of Graves of Your Enemies' Dead, to remove them from the equation. Since the dead have power and they give power and honor to the living community, desecrating those graves just removes them altogether from the situation and makes your enemies, puts them on the back foot a little bit. And there were some boat graves in Norway that were open to this way. And archaeologists dated spades found at the sites used to dig access holes, dated them to during the reign of Harold Bluetooth. Price says perhaps he was taking out rivals among his opponent's ancestors and thereby also weakening their grip on land and power through an attack on their family honor. So if the dead weren't important, this wouldn't have happened. Like, Harold Bluetooth really wanted to take over Norway. He did eventually, but he really, really wanted to take over Norway. So he was like, the best way for us to do this that's easy is to dig up people's fucking dead relatives.
Wow.
And move their shit around and steal their shit.
That's pretty rough as a wartime tactic.
It is. Even today, like, people don't
desecrate graves.
They don't like to mess with graves. Yeah, they don't like to mess with graves. Even if you're an atheist, you don't tend to mess with cemeteries just because you're like, someone lives here. So it was, I just thought it was a neat little, an interesting piece of information because, yeah, if the dead weren't important, none of that would have happened ever.
Yeah, would have been no reason to.
Nope. But that's just some of the stuff that we know from, like, Scandinavia and Northern Europe. So I know that you did some research on some other places as far as ancestor veneration.
Yeah, just some neighboring practices. We know in Gaelic Ireland and Wales, severed heads were preserved or defleshed.
Ew.
The head was believed to be the seat of the soul. So it was said they could give information such as directing battles, reciting poetry, and offering advice after death, which kind of calls back to Mimir, whose head was lost. The Vanir decapitated him and sent the head back to the Aesir, and Odin preserved the head with herbs and ointments. And he would whisper secrets into Odin's ear, if I recall correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So that there's a kind of a connection there. You can see where that can come from. For a much older example, it wouldn't be directly related to the Norse. It's the circa 90 to 20 BCE. So that would be very early Germanic tribes sort of coexisting with them. The Gaulish would burn letters to the dead. Diodorus Siculus, it wrote in the Library of History in 90 to 20 CE. A Greek historian, he wrote Library of History. He wrote, consequently, we are told at the funerals of their dead, some cast letters upon the pyre which they have written to their deceased kinsmen, as if the dead would be able to read these letters.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I thought that was a really neat belief. We don't have, a lot of detail we don't have a lot of writing in Norse society, so that probably was not, unless they wrote on sticks of wood or something and could all toss it into a fire, but that was an interesting practice, I thought, that was just preserved.
Yeah.
Through history. So.
Oh, that's really cool.
And then for one more, from my friend and fellow hold denizen, Celtic Ailey, who is a YouTuber. If you are interested in Celtic practices, you should definitely check out her channel.
Yes.
And there's a Manx folk belief that there's an elder bush planted outside houses. People are buried with a sprig of the elder bush from where they lived to help them find their way back to their home after death.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, it was really, really cool.
Oh, that's neat. Does that still happen today? Do you know? Did you say anything?
To this day, there are elder bushes planted outside homes in the Isle of Man. Yeah.
Oh, that's so neat. I love that.
So from all this, what can we take from this? Well, the dead can influence the world of the living. Gifts are given to ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
Ancestors do not have to be blood related. They can be someone important to you, like a hero, or someone you admire, like the story with the poet. So we see, with kings and things like that, people still worshiping them or venerating them after their death.
Yep. Someone important in your community, whatever.
Mm-hmm. And or just someone you admire, like the poet. There was no blood relation. He wasn't a leader in the community. It was just this guy really admired him and his poetry and wanted to be able to honor him by writing a poem for him, which is another good way to venerate the dead.
Yes.
And we learned that the overarching thing here is remembering and honoring ancestors is an important part of the heathen faith. It was a huge deal culturally.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of it, we don't have solid day-to-day evidence, just like everything you're really interested in.
Like everything.
We don't have their day-to-day information because they didn't write it down. And because a lot of it was so varied from place to place that by the time somebody did write it down, it was probably just from that one place that they wrote it down.
Yeah.
It wasn't, this part of Iceland and then the other part on the other side of Iceland. It was just this one tiny little piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a snapshot of what we know about Old Norse culture and ancestor veneration. It's frustrating, but it's also good.
That describes researching
Oh my
anything
God.
about praxis in
It really
heathenry
does.
at all.
It really does. Frustrating and also good with a question mark.
Yeah, well, it does leave room for revivalism and sort of developing your own practice and way of approaching things that works now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have my ancestors' mounds in my backyard.
No. most modern people don't, I imagine.
No, I would imagine not.
But that's obviously a very brief overview of what is in historical sources as far as this topic goes. There is definitely more, but for the sake of time and for the sake of our sanity, we didn't go any deeper than this. Where do we go from here in establishing modern praxis with ancestor veneration involved? And for that, we're going to turn to our interview with Wolf the Red for a discussion on modern ancestor worship, our personal practices as far as we want to discuss them, and we're going to have a really good talk. So we'll get to that next.
All right, we're sitting down with Wolf the Red now to have a conversation about ancestor veneration and modern practice. We're so excited to have him on the podcast. So, Wolf, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, hi, hello, and welcome to another guest spot with Wolf the Red.
Oh, man. Yeah, we're excited to have you.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, full disclosure, we know Wolf personally.
Wait, what?
Yeah, that's a lie. I'm kidding.
Who are you people?
Yeah.
What am I doing here?
Yeah, so we're talking about ancestor veneration, and this is something you know a lot about. You did a panel at Mystic South last year. You have lots of videos about ancestor veneration that are, either on ancestor veneration or related to ancestor veneration. And this is kind of like your jam. So we're really excited to talk to you about this.
It is. I think I've got well over, 3 hours worth of content on my channel that's dedicated to ancestor veneration. I think it's an important part of heathen praxis, and it's something that I like to advocate for pretty regularly. I see a lot of discourse surrounding the topic of ancestor veneration, and so I want to make sure that I advocate for it in a responsible way that allows people to explore the concept but also maintain safe boundaries for their own selves.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because one of the biggest issues that has come up a lot, especially in the last couple of years in heathenry, is problematic ancestors and how you deal with that. So I'm sure I have problematic ancestors. We all kind of do. So for you specifically, what do you do with iffy and problematic ancestors?
So, you're definitely right that I'm sure, here's the honest truth. In about 200 years, we are going to be the problematic ancestors.
Yup.
We like to see ourselves as inclusive and based and great and furthering humanity and well aware of all of our biases and all of that great stuff. But I can promise you in 200 or 500 years, they're going to be looking back on us going, why did they only fight for trans rights? Why didn't they fight for this other social concept that had not yet been invented yet? So just like trans people have always existed, but they didn't have, advocacy or, a focus on it, there's this other ethereal social construct that we have yet to focus on or create, and we will be bigots because we didn't do that at that time. If you were to apply those future morals onto us. So, applying our present day morals on the past immediately shines a pretty negative light on pretty much everybody that existed, which is why I like to make sure that people understand that, your great 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 uncle was doing his best at the time, or at least we can hope. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
what do we do though when we know that great uncle Cletus probably owned slaves or something else, beat his wife, or you think of it, and I promise you have somebody in your family that did it, because just history is awful.
Mhm. History is
It is.
awful.
It
Fucking
is
true.
so true. So what do we do with that? One of the ways that I like to look at it is, let's say you have, I'm going to keep going back to this uncle situation. You have a great 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 uncle who was awful. He just did this awful thing, whatever it is, whatever you want to think of. He was an alcoholic and beat his spouse or something like that. Your great 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 grandfather, who would have been that guy's brother at the time, saw and learned from that mistake and then passed those family values on. It's like, if you ever heard, maybe your father say something out loud of like, you never hit a woman. Well, I wonder where that value came from. Probably came from learning that value from a mistake or action that he saw at one point through history, and it's traveled down through the family line to arrive to this moral lesson that you're being taught by, your dad or whoever. When it comes to how do we handle stuff like that, we find ways to focus on any kind of positives that you may be able to find, or if you just aren't able to, like as a person, like personally you're not able to rationalize it or compartmentalize the problem that may have taken place in history. Because, if somebody was a slave already and was just fucking awful, and all the family stories about this ancestor are just awful, and you don't want to engage with that, then write it off. You don't have to. When we talk about ancestor veneration, it does not mean every ancestor is good and every ancestor is worthy of your personal veneration. You also don't have to focus on any one individual. You can just be thankful for your ancestors having existed and procreated so that you can end up in the moment of being alive. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for those people.
Yep.
And I think that in of itself is worth at least recognition, even if it's not going to be direct praise and thanks.
Yeah.
It occurs to me just now, that when that connection is more personal, someone that you knew in your personal daily life, that maybe you weren't on good terms when they died, but you still want to engage. Like, how do you go about doing that?
Very carefully. You always want to make sure that you're maintaining your own personal boundaries and protecting your own mental health. That is going to be more important than any specific ancestor work that you may want to do or may be told that you need to do. That is not something that I would ever advocate for. If you have an abusive or problematic person that you experience directly, those feelings are going to be 1,000 times more intense than some ethereal person that some family story has been passed down or some written record that you may have come across while doing some research. It's like night and day. It's like comparing apples to a hand grenade. It's just not the same thing. And so I would always advocate for you to watch out for your own mental health. Make sure that you're not putting yourself in a vulnerable position in a way that would just be uncomfortable. Because that's not what I would advocate for at all when it comes to ancestor veneration.
Yeah.
If the person was bad or problematic or hurtful or abusive, fucking write them off. They can burn in Nostrum for all I care. It doesn't matter. Just because they're blood, just because they were quote unquote family, doesn't mean that they deserve anything from you.
Mm-hmm. I have some ancestors, like recent ancestors, like my grandfather on my dad's side, not a super great human being. He did the best he could in, growing up as the child of immigrants in Minnesota and North Dakota, poor, wins in the army, all of these things. Was not a great dad. If I do engage with him at all in my ancestor veneration practices, it's usually just acknowledging him. Like, I acknowledge that you existed. Thank you for raising my dad. Thank you for making him into a better dad when he had me and my sisters.
Yep.
Because if he hadn't treated my dad like the way that he had, my dad would have been a very different person, and he's an amazing dad.
Absolutely.
So I have the space to do that. Like, I didn't know him very well when he was alive, so I don't have that relationship there. But even if it's just acknowledging them, if that's all you have the spoons to do, if that's what you feel like you need to do, I think that's probably okay.
I think for many people, that's more than most heathens do on a daily basis. And so, absolutely, I would agree that that's plenty fine. Just acknowledgement. But again, even that's not required. If you want to be like, thank you, family line, except for great uncle Cletus, that's okay. Like, you can do that.
That's also fine. Yes. Thanks, everybody, except fuck you, Uncle Cletus.
God, that would be a great shirt. Fuck you, Uncle Cletus.
Yes, yep. New merch dropping now.
There you go.
Yes.
You can have that one. That one's free.
Okay.
Yeah, first t-shirt design.
I don't know how I feel about that.
I know how Uncle
Damn
Cletus
it.
will feel.
Oh, jeez. Oh my god. Oh, okay. But like, that's an interesting idea, like the whole you can kind of pick and choose who you choose to venerate. Because especially like if you're adopted or you don't have any records of your family for whatever reason.
You have to.
You have to. You can pick and choose who you venerate because your ancestors aren't just your blood relatives. They're the people who raised you, who raised them, and your community ancestors. Like, I know a lot of people in the LGBTQ community who include the people who rioted at Stonewall in their ancestor veneration.
Absolutely.
Because that's part of their history as a queer person.
Absolutely.
And it's awesome. Like, I don't understand why heathens don't do more ancestor veneration and why it's not as big a part of the practice as it should be, in my opinion.
And I see this more on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter nearly as much as I used to be, but Ocean and I both have dealt with this quite a bit, where you have these neoliberals trying to shame people for not just immediately writing off the entire past as explicitly evil. And so you see people talking about ancestor veneration, and then you see other people come on going, well, why would you give respect to somebody who owned slaves?
Yeah.
It's like that you're black and whiting this in a way that is just very unhealthy and super unproductive, and not how examining history works at all.
No. Even Hitler was a vegetarian.
That makes a lot of sense with the vegetarian. I'm sorry, you can delete that.
like maybe that was a bad example on a heathen podcast. Holy shit. But like, I lost. Oh, damn it. Okay.
Let's circle back to the adopted ancestors part.
Yeah.
Yes. The adopted ancestors it's a cool concept because like you can really decide who you want to include in your hearth cult and who you want to honor as people who got you to where you are, whether they're alive or dead. It can be a little bit hero worshipy, a little hero veneration-y, which is also historically accurate.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just your relatives. It's not just the people who you're biologically related to.
So, yeah, it absolutely is important to acknowledge, like, adopted ancestors because, like you had mentioned a moment ago, what if you're adopted? And what if you're adopted in a way that there are no records to trace back to? You don't know where your family line is. Like, the paper trail literally ends, and there's not a way to track it down. You're uncomfortable with DNA tests or whatever, and you just can't connect back. And even, as you mentioned as well, that it's historically valid, but even if it wasn't, I don't even think that matters personally.
No.
But, we can absolutely point to history and say, this is what they've done in the past for 1,000 or more years.
Yeah.
It's very important to be able to do that because if you don't have family it is important to find family. And found family can very often be more impactful, more meaningful than even the ones that you were born with. How often have we heard the phrase, blood doesn't make you family? And it's something that I stand by pretty hard. I've got a great family, and I'm not related to any of them directly, you know what I mean? So
Yeah, it's completely fine. And people get so irritated when it's mostly Twitter bros who are like, so you're not related to this person. Why are you putting them in your ancestor veneration practices? And it's like, well, they raised me.
Yeah.
Or this is my dad. Like, yeah, he adopted me, but this is my dad. Like,
Yeah.
Yep.
it doesn't matter. The people who raised you, the people who are around when you need them.
Yeah, the people who heavily influenced who you are as a person are just as family as, anybody who would have been involved in your creation.
Yep. And sometimes those people aren't always the greatest people.
Yep.
Sometimes they're the best. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about because there's so much available as far as ancestry in general to pull from. And people limit it so much by just focusing on their blood relatives.
Yeah.
I agree. The whole blood take within heathenry is just
Gross.
It's such a limiting. Well, number one, it's gross, but number two, it's extremely limiting. Like it prevents you from being able to explore a lot of concepts that we find extremely valuable within our community here in the Hold. I encourage people to stop worrying so much about DNA. Being interested in your ancestry and getting interested in heathenry because of that, completely valid. I've seen tons of people do it, and that's awesome and based. Because we are, advocating for ancestor veneration, you normally will want to start with, okay, where did I come from? So I can get to know those people. Now, not everybody's able to do that. That's what we just covered. But it's still good to look and try and see where it is you came from. I think that is good. But don't make it your entire personality.
No.
Don't limit yourself to it, because you can adopt ancestors. You can adopt heroes throughout history and make them important in your ancestor veneration practice.
Absolutely.
We discussed earlier in the podcast how basically there's nothing on daily praxis about any aspect of heathenry, and ancestor veneration is no exception to that. You have examples here and there of some things being done that could be called that, but like what people did in their homes every day, we don't know. So how did you approach developing an ancestor veneration practice? How did you develop your approach?
It's just kind of something I feel like this is going to be common for most people. And a note that I wanted to touch on a second ago, and I forgot, and now I remembered, is that the concept of ancestor veneration can be so broad that I think for many people it's really overwhelming. And so how often do we have people come into the Hold and they ask, like, hey, what is this one specific thing? And it's like, well, actually, it can be anything. And people are like, no, it can't be anything. What is the specific thing? It's like, no, I promise. It can be so broad, it can be anything. And it's okay. And people get really overwhelmed by that because they're used to having their hand held. They're used to being told what to think and that cookie cutter things fit in. Ancestor veneration is no different. It can be extremely broad. So when I talk about my personal practice, I want to make sure everybody knows that is my thing, the way that I do it, and yours does not need to look this way, and it probably won't. Probably shouldn't, just in that I want people to develop their own praxis. If you find elements in mind that are useful, cool. No shame in borrowing or whatever. Just make sure that it's something that you're comfortable with. So to answer that question now completely, is that it started off really small. Just looking at my family tree, I know a lot of my family history. One story that we have is I live in Georgia, and in the area that I grew up in, there are trenches dug. It was in my backyard. The neighborhood was, I don't mind saying this, the neighborhood was called Garrison Ridge, and it's because there was literally a garrison outpost up on the ridge in my neighborhood, and they just kind of like built the neighborhood on top of it. But it was from the Civil War. And so you could go out into the woods and behind all the houses and find trenches where the soldiers would post up. And my dad found an old bullet, and it was just really cool history.
That's cool.
It was super cool. Me as a kid, of course, growing up realizing how awful the South was and all that. So yeah, I grew up in that area. And so one of the old family stories that we have is the house that, so many greats. I'm never going to get it right. But, great-great-great-grandfather, he would be sent to the general store in Kennesaw Mountain area. It's what is now Powder Springs, Georgia. And there's actually a famous painting in Georgia of this general store that has signs on it and whatnot. That was the old general store. It's changed over time. The boy was sent to the store. He had to carry a stick and his, $2 or whatever, and put the little white flag on the stick. And he had to walk through the battlements. He had to walk through the soldier lines as they were faced down. They had their muskets very lazily pointed because it was, a standoff. Nobody was actually actively fighting. It was more just like, I've got to hold this area. But he had to walk through that. He had to talk to the little lieutenant and go, hey, my I need bread.
Yeah.
And please. Yeah. And he had to walk through, and he'd buy his stuff, and then he'd walk back home, and he'd walk right by all the soldiers. And
with his little white flag.
That. With his little white flag. And so I really appreciated the bravery of that young boy and being able to, swallow whatever apprehension. Imagine a kid today having to do that. Walk through soldier lines to go get, bread from the store for his mom. And then know that he could be shot. If somebody didn't pay attention to the white flag or whatever, something bad could happen. And I just think about that. But it's evolved through time. I've actually got a couple artifacts on my altar. My grandfather started a business. Out front of the business was this giant weather vane. Massive. And then me as a little kid, I'm, 5, 6 years old.
Yeah,
so
it's huge.
Yeah, it may have only been 10, 12 feet tall. It may have been 20 feet tall, but it felt like it was 100 feet tall as a kid. But both my cousin and I have tiny replicas of that made out of metal, and it's got the business name on it. When they built the thing back in the 50s or 60s, whenever it was, they gave the family 2 mini replicas. The company did. It's like, hey, this is what your thing's going to look like. And I got a hold of one of those, and I brought it home, and it sits on my altar because it's got our last name on it, and it's got the family business on it, and so it's just a really cool thing that I like to hold on there.
That is really cool.
It's really neat.
I also like to adopt. I'm a big fan of adopting historical figures, and I have adopted Harold Bluetooth into my hearth cult, and he's an important ancestor figure that I look back to. I really appreciate how hard he fought to unify. I take a lot of notes from where I think his mind might have been. Of course, again, this is all personal conjecture. I'm not making any claims historically, but I assume where his mind had to have been to want to take people who are used to fighting each other, used to not getting along, used to arguing, wanting their own autonomy and all that kind of stuff, and convincing them that, hey, we need to be working together towards a common goal. We need to be working together to create a unified country. And if you will rally behind me, I promise we can build something great here.
Yeah.
And I take a lot of notes from that. And I think he's somebody worth venerating.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up Harold Bluetooth, because we just talked about him in like the previous bit about how he ransacked graves.
And maybe you don't
because it
venerate
was
that
wartime. No, because it was wartime, and like even people who do good things can also do bad things in their lives.
Oh, it's so true.
It's all a matter of perspective, and that's the great thing about dealing with way far back, historical figures who we don't know everything about, we can kind of choose a little bit. Well, they're mythical ancestors to a degree. Like, they've been mythologized so much that we can kind of pick those things. It's kind of great.
I agree 100%. But yeah, a practice that I often try to advocate for people when they're starting to get used to venerating their ancestors, think about any time that you've been around an older relative that you can stand to be around. Because I know for many of us, it's kind of hard to be around family, especially lately with how crazy things have been. But if you've got a family member, let's say you got a grandfather or an aunt or somebody who you do respect and like, ask them to tell you family stories. Ask them to share a piece of family history with you so that you can keep that alive. It is one of the most powerful ways that you can honor history of your family.
Yes.
That you can honor your ancestors. Because then you can then share those stories around, especially, some place like the Hold where it's pretty much guaranteed about 100 people are going to see that. That's more than that person probably is used to experiencing, especially in history where they may have only ever known 100 people in their entire lives just due to how insular things used to be. Now their stories are spreading greatly, and that's very useful and powerful for them.
Yes. I love family stories. Like, everybody's got their weird family stories, and everyone's got like their big fish story, And,
absolutely.
Some of them are fucking wild. And whether or not they're actually rooted in fact is not the point. It's the memories that are attached to who told you that story and who told the person who told you that story. And that's kind of the fun part about family histories and stuff like that, is that stuff changes depending on who's telling the story, what the situation is, and it kind of grows and evolves and becomes its own thing. And sharing those stories with other people, it's a common thread of humanity that we can share with other people, because everybody has that one story in their family that's like,
well, the 32-pound catfish, right?
Or the 32-pound catfish, or the walking uphill both ways in the snow, one shoe.
The line that I always like to give is that every good story deserves embellishment.
It's so true.
It is.
And storytelling, it's such an important part of just being a human being. And that's such a big part of what comes into my ancestor veneration practice, is hearing people's family stories and telling my own family's stories, because they're hilarious and they're fucking wild. They are off the wall. But it's a human thing to tell stories.
Absolutely.
And to tell stories about your family is just great.
Another really easy thing you can do to honor ancestors is, let's say you are getting together for a family meal. Let's say it's Thanksgiving. Let's say it's Christmas. Let's say it's Easter, whatever you got to deal with, right? But you're together with family. Encourage everybody to have one empty plate at the end of the table. Let's say, Aunt Mavis passed away a couple years ago and people are really sad that Aunt Mavis isn't there for us anymore. Set a plate in Aunt Mavis's chair and scoop her a plate, just like if she was there, and let it sit there. That is her plate. And then at the end of the meal, take that plate outside. Set it out for the animals. Yes, the coyotes are going to get it. Yes, the possum's going to get it. That's fine, because we know that offerings left out for animals are offerings accepted and received. And so that is a really good way to keep their memory alive. Invite them to the meal. Just because they're not there physically doesn't mean that they're not watching over us. I think that's something that I firmly believe in. And making sure that they have a place that is comfortable and inviting, and that they feel still part of the family even though they're not with us, is just a very noble ancestor veneration act that you can do. And it's one that you can involve the whole family in, and you don't have to tell them it's a heathen practice. And I almost guarantee you that they'll be excited, like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Because I've heard other people pick that practice up and go, yeah, my mom actually thought that was a really cool idea, that we make a plate for grandma even though she's not here, because it's your mom's mom. Of course she wants to remember. Of course she wants to feel like she's still there. the family will appreciate that act.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people. Food and holidays are like,
Can't have one without the other.
yeah, they're like, for lack of a better metaphor, they're the bread and butter of family gatherings. And
True.
womp womp. But like, you get together, you share family recipes, you bake the cookies that your great grandmother made, and you share these family recipes, you bake them and you make them together, and then you eat them together. And a lot of, I have done ancestor veneration practice by doing those things, just by
Absolutely.
making it an intentional veneration activity, by getting out the krumkaka iron and making all the stupid krumkaka cookies, because my family is Norwegian, and you have to stand there in front of the stove for 2 hours rolling these wafer cookies into cones. And
Yeah.
it's it's a veneration thing, because it's a connection that you can make to the past, and you go, okay, this is something my family has been doing for a long time, so I'm drawing on that thread back into history.
Exactly.
And it's neat. And I love it when people are like, I'm coming over for Thanksgiving and I'm making my grandma's apple pie.
Absolutely.
Be my mama's boiled cookies.
Oh yeah, see?
Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm. That stuff it's so simple, and you can kind of do it without having to say out loud to family that, yeah, we're doing an ancestor veneration activity today, kids. It's, nope, we're making Meemaw's cookies.
Yeah. People don't realize just how often they do ancestor veneration activities, and they just didn't know to name it ancestor veneration. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, see, now I want krumkakas.
We'll go make you some.
No, it's so involved.
Astrid, go venerate your ancestors.
I am. My grandma stopped making krumkakas at Christmas because it's so involved. She's
I
like,
almost
I'm
just
passing.
spit my drink out. Oh my god. That's so funny. I was like, I can take a drink while she explains this.
Mhm.
Nope.
Nope.
That's
my
hilarious.
my grandma has stopped making them because they are so involved. She bought me my own Nordic ware krumkaka iron for Christmas like 12 years ago, and she's like, I am passing this to you because I'm done. I have done my time. It is your turn to make these.
Knowing when to stop family traditions is good family ancestor veneration activities.
Yes.
When to pass them on when you are too tired to do them anymore. That is completely fine.
It's so based.
Yep.
So we talked earlier about there being a lot of different ways, like everything. Pretty much, it could look like anything. It's your own practice. Do it how you feel.
Yeah.
So what does your ancestor veneration practice look like? And we can all talk about, what we do.
Yeah.
And,
So normally I include when I'm doing my general offerings for the day. I do daily offerings. I'm a little extra. I don't shame anybody
Just
who
a
doesn't.
little.
Just a little
extra.
Kind of known for it. Sue me. I don't know. When I'm making my daily offerings, I always offer to the gods, then the whites, then the ancestors, and now my philia. I've included that in. Yeah, I always make sure that I hit those four. I name a handful of gods and then say, all the gods. I name both the land and house whites, and then I refer to a few handful of specific named ancestors, and then my ancestors broadly, and then I offer to my philia. And I just do that every day. Sometimes it can be as simple as just like tossing out a few crackers very irreverently. Now, this, when I say I do daily offerings, please know that this isn't like my ritual video setup. I don't do that. Usually I'm walking towards my truck in the morning and it's still dark out and I'm tossing crackers into the woods. It is extremely irreverent looking, but I promise, very pious. So that's what my daily practice would look like. But then something like a little bit more involved, I will set up the altar or whatever. I'll get out my offering bowls. I've got a couple of really nice offering bowls over the last few years, and I pull out the fine china, as it were, and I'll make sure that I'm lighting incense. I'm setting out a plate. I'm remembering names. I'm remembering stories. Just like with, fixing the plate at family time. Any time I'm around, my dad's side of the family, it's always some story. I'm getting my my grandfather to tell some story. For Father's Day last year, I actually gave both of them empty leather-bound notebooks, and I said, "You two have to fill these up with your thoughts and anything that you can remember from your life or from stories that you've heard. You have to fill these up. I need them." My dad, I was like, "You got a little bit more time." And my grandfather, I was like, "Come on, we all know what's up here. I need you to get to writing now." That's some stuff, and I try to make sure that I revisit the family land, because we do have some really old family land that's been in the family for generations, and going to that space, knowing where it is, the history of it, making sure that it's taken care of and all that good stuff. It's very important to me.
Yeah. And what does yours look like, Mox?
Well, funny you should mention breaking out the fine china, Wolf. I have fine china on my altar. That was my great grandmother.
Oh, you would. You would.
Now who's extra?
Yeah.
My fine china is carved out of wood, so.
mine is porcelain with roses, actually, and it's the offering bowl that I have there. And then I've got also my great grandmother's a statue of a robin that I use to sort of represent ancestors, most specifically my female ancestors, or like a DCer, kind of all that rolled into one. I had been using it for a while, and then I talked to a friend of mine who's from Britain. He told me that in Britain, it is a folk tradition that if you see a robin coming to your house, that means it's your ancestors coming to visit you.
Oh.
I've heard that a lot from a lot of people, is that the red bird is a sign that an ancestor is visiting you.
Yeah, like cardinals. I've heard that about cardinals.
Yep.
Yeah. Lots of red birds. I think that's really neat. I want to know why the red birds, though.
I don't know.
That's very cool.
Just seems like something that got passed down and kind of got lost through the years.
Mostly my daily practice is sharing a cup of tea or some water as a sort of an offering. And sometimes I do peppermints. My great-grandmother had a candy bowl full of Brock's Starlight Mints on her dresser, which I remember being like way over my head. My hand couldn't reach. I couldn't have been more than 3 or 4. I think I was 4, almost 5 when she died. So probably about 3 years old. And I wouldn't be able to reach it. And I actually inherited her bedroom set when I was older. And it's about a waist-high dresser. I was a very small child. But every time I'd go play in her room, she lived with my grandparents at that point. She'd sit there crocheting all her granny square blankets she made for everybody in the family, and I'd play with her old toys, like a sawdust-filled stuffed animal and a really old porcelain doll. And after I was done playing and went to leave, she would get me exactly 1 Starlight Mint. And peppermints have been my favorite candy ever since.
Oh,
Heck yeah.
That's awesome.
So I will share some peppermints sometimes with them. So
That's actually a really good one. My grandmother always kept the hard peppermint candies in a big like cardboard tub. Katie's grandmother does something like that too. Well, matriarch passed away. The family keeps the bowl of the soft peppermints. All the grandchildren know that when they walk into the house, they can go right to the peppermint bowl, and there's always little soft peppermints in the bowl. I hadn't really thought about it that way before, though, Mox. That's a neat idea.
Yeah.
I might borrow that one from you.
mostly though, I'll just sometimes I'll just kind of talk to them and sort of just kind of sit there and see what goes through my head after that and take it from there.
No, that's really good.
Yeah. Yeah. Mine is, I don't do offerings every day. Rarely does that happen that I do two days in a row, especially lately. But I talk to them, just, randomly talk to them. I like to do research on my lineage a little bit, just because those stories are important to remember, and it's interesting. It's interesting, and it's part of my job. Like, part of my job as a librarian is doing some genealogy stuff. So, like, I have the tools.
Yeah.
I have the technology, and so I can do that stuff. But I have a cameo necklace that my dad's mom had that she gave to my dad right before she died. And my mom never got to meet her. I never got to meet her. But I have that on my altar because about 10 years ago, I asked my mom, I was like, what does Grandma Thelma have? And did she leave anything? And she's like, yeah, I have this in a drawer and I was gonna, here, you can have this. And so I keep that on my altar. And I do leave offerings occasionally for them. My family is really big with, there's this cinnamon orange spice tea that my grandparents brew every time we get together. And every holiday gathering, there's always a huge pot of this tea. And it's so caffeinated, it's unreal. And we all start drinking it at about 10 o'clock because I don't know why. That's just what we do. And so every time I have people over at my house, I'm like, it's like 9:30, 10 o'clock. You want some orange tea, some cinnamon orange tea? And I'll brew some tea and we'll sit around the table and we'll talk and kind of wind down for the night. And that's a thing that my family always does. And I've always kind of carried that on. Like, that's a lot of my ancestor veneration, is just carrying on some of those little traditions that my family does with my my extended and chosen family now.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yep. And like the only big time of year that I do a lot of ancestor veneration stuff is around Halloween, because I'm American and that's when I'm already thinking about, dead things and dead people and skeletons and ghosts and
Hell
all of
yeah,
that.
goth shit.
Yeah, metal.
Exactly. When I start redecorating my house for the year.
Yes. Yeah, that's when I buy all my decorations for my house. It's October.
Yeah.
It's when all the skulls and bats are in the stores. I can buy shit to hang up all year in my house. I do a lot of ancestor veneration stuff around then. Like I write down the names of all the people that I know in my life who've passed. And I have a little wooden coffin that I've wood burned runes into and some decorations into for hell specifically. And
I love your hell
it's
coffin.
like my favorite fucking thing. I love that
really,
thing.
really cool.
And I put all of those slips of paper with all of those names in it into that little coffin at the beginning of October. And whenever I get to do my hell bloat, I take each of those pieces of paper out and I read the name out loud. I say something about them, about, a memory that I remember. Usually it's something ridiculous, because the people in my life who have passed they were ridiculous people, and I love that about them. But, it's a way to keep them alive in my life a little bit, and then I burn those slips of paper. And I do it again next year.
I really like the slips of paper burn thing. I've used that in a few different offering methods, and it feels so raw, if that makes sense.
It's very satisfying. Like, there's a good sense of, like, closure and
completion.
Yes, like it's a good thing.
Absolutely.
I've done stuff where I've written a letter to someone who's passed and let it sit on my altar for a while until I was ready to read it. And then I would read it out loud and then burn it or leave it on my altar for a little bit longer and then deal with it, A lot of my ancestor veneration is pretty on the fly, but it's important that we talk about this stuff because all three of us have very different things we do.
Mm-hmm.
And they all
very much so
work great.
Yeah.
I like it when practices can be open-ended.
Mm-hmm. Because this is probably what it looked like way back in,
I promise you it did.
The 500s. Oh, yeah.
They toasted their ancestors and gave, speeches about them, and we do know that much.
Yeah.
So passing along the stories is very much historical.
Oh, yeah. Yep. That big fish story. You gotta tell it.
Have to. Well, back then it was a dragon, right? That's what they did.
Yes, it was a dragon.
They slayed dragons.
Mm-hmm.
Dragon had to be 20 feet tall, I swear it.
Jim, you're telling it wrong. It was 55 feet.
Or whatever unit of measurement they used to measure back in the Viking Age.
Whatever. whatever unit of measurement. It was 55, not 25.
7 spears long he was.
There you go.
God damn it. That is what is so cool about heathenry, is that all of those little nitty-gritty parts of practice that everybody is always concerned about can be really whatever you want them to be.
Heck yeah.
I've heard you talk about like the pillars of heathenry, and ancestor veneration is like right up there. Can you explain what you mean by that and tell us a little bit about it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when I think of heathenry, which is, as I define, the pre-Christian pan-Germanic faith of the folk peoples of that time, I firmly believe that there are, and I'm so big on metaphors, so if metaphors aren't your thing, I'm sorry. But to help visualize concepts, I love metaphors. And I just think of pillars that kind of hold up the foundation of heathenry. And if you lose a pillar, something is going to fall over. Something's going to fall apart. Mm-hmm. And I firmly believe that there are now 4, I used to think 3, 4 pillars of heathenry, which include the gods, the whites, and the ancestors, and the philia. I think that all of those are important and, I dare say, essential to practicing as a heathen. It is okay if, you can't offer daily or even monthly, just as long as you kind of keep those concepts in mind and understand that they are important to heathenry. That is something that I advocate for pretty seriously, because I want people to have a fulfilling praxis within their heathenry. It's kind of what I do in helping people kind of navigate and educate and understand how their praxis can look. Not that I tell people how to practice, but that, here's some examples, here's some things. I'm going to show you what I do. You can pick and choose whatever you want to from what I do and incorporate it however you want. It's why I put all of my rituals that I do out there, so that people can pick apart the rituals and find what they like and is useful for them. I feel the same way about ancestor veneration, is that they are just as important as the gods. They are not gods. They are not the same as gods. But when it comes to holding up the foundation of heathenry, they are just as important as the land spirits and the house spirits and the gods. And I now also believe that the philia is this 4th pillar that is really important for people to engage with. But that's a story for another time.
Okay.
It's really interesting to think about that metaphor specifically, because there are a lot of heathens who just focus on the gods.
The gods, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at it as a foundation, you're only giving attention to this one pillar, this one part of the foundation. You're only maintaining that one. The rest of it's going to not look so great in a little while. It's going to wear down and fall apart, and all of a sudden, your whole practice starts to wobble.
I genuinely picture it like a bowl full of water, and that the water is the heathenry. The water represents the heathenry. And if one of those pillars is too short or disappears completely, that bowl will start to tip, and some of the heathenry will pour out. And we don't want that. We want the heathenry in the bowl.
Yes.
The heathenry will pour out.
Because religion's fluid, and it can flow and take shape, and you can make it whatever you want to be, and you dip your cup into it, and you sip on it, and it's life-giving. And I've thought this metaphor through.
Okay,
I know what I'm about.
See, okay, now it makes sense.
The heathenry's in the bowl.
There is no spoon. The heathenry is in the bowl.
Oh my gosh.
That was good.
That was like my one funny moment. I will take it. That's staying in.
As a note, I've never laughed while recording myself before, and so seeing my waveform like stutter and jump in my laugh is very funny to me.
It's very weird. Welcome to podcasting with Mox and Astrid.
Yes.
We are serious heathens all the time.
Very good. Yeah. Serious heathenry only, please.
Only. No spilling of bowls.
Yeah, we don't want any heathenry spilled out on the floor. That'd be bad.
God.
Then you have to get out the religion mop, and I don't know where I'm going with this. We can continue now.
Okay. Is there anything else that we haven't asked you that you'd like to share about ancestry veneration?
Fuck if I know.
Okay.
Okay.
Just thought I'd ask, make sure we didn't miss anything.
Cool. All right. Yeah, so thank you so much, Wolf, for coming on and talking with us and sharing some of your insight on ancestry veneration. It's been fun.
It has.
It's
Heck
always
yeah.
fun.
I agree.
But yeah, so is there anything you want to tell people about, like, what you've got going on and where to find you?
Oh my
If they don't
gosh, do I
already
have
know.
a couple minutes? Because I got a
Yeah,
lot.
absolutely.
I got a lot going
go
on.
for it.
So we have fully kicked off the Southeast Heathens, which both Mox and Astrid have been heavily involved in. It is a monthly gathering that I host. We do it in a state park. It's very open. It's very friendly. It's free. Don't have to pay. Do potluck. We have way too much food every single time.
Every time.
We have games. We talk. We hang out. We chat. We get to let our hair down a little bit and just like be religious together. And then Ocean and I have been trading off every month. One month I do a ritual. The next month he does a ritual. It's been a lot of fun. I bring this giant trailer with me. I basically load my whole house down in it. And we decorate that whole pavilion and make it feel, really pagan. It's just a really good time. We build a giant communal altar. And everybody just seems to have a really good time doing it. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, please join the Discord. There should be a link in the description because these two are mods in it.
Yes,
And,
there is.
Yeah, let us know that you want to join the Southeast Heathens, and you can come hang out with me, Mox, and Astrid, because they're heavily involved in the group. It'd be a lot of fun. Yeah. Outside of that, I'm trying to get my YouTube channel back rolling on all cylinders. I made a really important video called The Norse Philia, Spirit Animal, or Something More. I strongly recommend people go take a look at that video. It is a long boy, and it's got the most information ever. It is easily the best video on the Norse Philia. If you are interested in getting involved in figuring out what your philia may look like or work like, that's the video you want to watch, I promise. It's the one thing I will never be humble about.
It is very good.
It is incredible.
As somebody
good.
who's a stickler for sources and research and shit, Wolf did his research for this video.
Absolutely.
He was stressing out about it for weeks doing this video. And it's
I think I'm the
so
only
well
person to ever do research on the Norse Philia.
Ju-
Because
judging by
everybody
the
else's
content.
video is full of shit.
Yup. Maybe.
But no, we're still kicking in the Discord. I strongly recommend people join, come hang out with us. We're having a good time. Mox and Astrid are great. I really enjoy having them as mods. They're active in the community. They'll answer your questions, and they want you to don't tell them I said this, but they want you to talk about their videos in the server and ask them questions, and that proves that you watched the video. Don't tell them I said that though, okay? Just shh. It's between you and me.
Oh, okay.
I think that's it.
Okay.
No
Yep.
Patreon, no Redbubble.
Oh, yeah. I've got I know I just told you to go check out that one particular video, but I do have a YouTube channel full of information and opinions that you can go take a look at. I've got about a dozen rituals you can look over. I've got gathering videos. I've got Havamal videos. I'm going to be kicking those back up again. If you're looking for anything that might be considered god art, I have a project that I've been working on with another mod named Jail. It's called the God Art Project. There are about a dozen or so gods up there that you can buy stickers of, or shirts, or posters.
They're awesome.
I believe that they are awesome, Astrid. Thank
They
you.
really are.
They are. They're fantastic.
I have the hell piece on my altar.
They're just reverent enough that they make great altar pieces, but also they are casual enough that you can wear them as a shirt and also hand wave when somebody who you don't want to explain it to and just be like, oh no, I just like Vikings. And you can get away with that. If you're interested in supporting any of the work that I do, both in the community or on YouTube or any of the gathering stuff that I've been doing, please check out my Patreon. It's patreon.com/wolfthered. Every dollar helps, but otherwise, come hang out with us on the Discord. I'd love to talk to people.
The links to Wolf's Patreon, YouTube channel, and a link to join the Hold Discord server will be in the description. So make sure you check those out if you're interested in that.
Go big or go home.
As usual, make sure to subscribe to us at Friggin' Heathens Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Pocket Casts. And check out Wolf the Red on YouTube. And we'll see you next time. And always remember, cite your sources, label your UPG, and always question everything.